Mark Benson finished his morning run with sweat rolling down his back, the Texas humidity hitting him like a wall. At 67, he still outran men half his age, but the heat felt heavier than usual as he pushed open his front door. The music hit him first, deep bass shaking the walls like a club party gone wrong. He stepped inside, froze, and looked around the living room. Empty beer bottles covered the coffee table, pizza boxes sagged on the floor, and two strangers were asleep, one on the couch with his mouth hanging open, the other curled in the recliner with muddy boots still on. Mark blinked slowly, his breathing steadying as he whispered, "This is my home, what happened here?" But he already knew. His daughter and her husband had turned the place into a dump. He walked down the hallway, sweat cooling on his skin. Something felt wrong even before he reached the master bedroom. The door stood wide open. That door hadn't been open in years. Then he saw the black trash bags, 4 of them, lined against the wall like his life was ready for garbage pickup. He didn't need to open them to know what was inside. His shirts, his shoes, his books, the things he had collected with his late wife, all stuffed away like he was being erased. He stepped into the bedroom and saw strange clothes in the closet, men's boots beside the bed, and makeup scattered across the dresser where his wallet used to rest. The framed photo of his wife, Linda, was gone. In its place sat a dirty ashtray. His chest tightened. Someone had replaced him completely. "Dad, you're back," his daughter Mia said from the doorway. She wore one of her husband's shirts, her hair tangled like she hadn't slept. Behind her, Jason stepped forward, bare-chested, arms crossed over his tattooed chest. "This is simple, old man," Jason said, his voice sharp. "You live here because we let you." Mark held his breath, eyes fixed on them. "We need to talk about what's going on," he said quietly. But Jason only smirked. "This house will be ours soon anyway. So get used to your new room." Mia added in a sweet, manipulative voice, "Dad, you should be grateful. At your age, you need us more than we need you." Their words cut deeper than any wound Mark had taken during his years as a firefighter. For a moment, Mark searched his daughter's face, trying to find the girl he once carried on his shoulders at parades, the teenager who cried when he taught her how to ride a bike, the young woman who hugged him so tight at graduation he thought his ribs would crack. But she wasn't there. Not even a shadow of her remained. All he saw was entitlement and disrespect. "I see," he murmured, 2 simple words that made Mia frown. Jason smirked, thinking he had one. "That's right. Stay quiet," Jason said. "It's better for everyone when you remember your place." Mark didn't argue. He simply bent down, picked up one of the trash bags filled with his belongings, and walked slowly toward the small storage room they had forced him into months ago. The storage room was barely 8 by 10 feet, with one small window and a cot they claimed was good enough for him. Mark set the bag down and closed the door behind him. His movements were calm, steady, the kind of calm he learned through 32 years of fighting fires. Panic never solved anything. Planning did. On the wall hung an old photo of him in uniform, Captain Mark Benson of Station 24, standing tall in front of his engine truck. He sat on the cot, staring at his younger self. Outside the thin walls, he heard Jason laughing and Mia chatting as if nothing had happened. But Mark wasn't broken. He wasn't defeated. He was planning. And once he started planning, there was no turning back. The next morning, Mark woke before sunrise. He dressed quietly, sliding into khaki slacks and a clean button-down shirt instead of his usual running clothes. Today wasn't a day for jogging. Today was for action. He moved through the hallway silently, avoiding the floorboards he knew would creak. Mia and Jason slept behind a closed door, unaware that the man they thought they'd broken had already begun moving against them. Outside, the gray morning light coated the driveway as Mark entered his truck and started the engine. With no radio on, no distractions, he drove into Houston determined and clear-headed. By the time he reached downtown, traffic had already thickened. Mark parked in the garage and took the elevator to the 7th floor. When he pushed open the glass door to Suite 712, a woman with sharp eyes and a firm handshake stepped out. "Mr. Benson? I'm attorney Alice Carter. Come on in." Her office was neat and organized, sunlight shining across a desk stacked with legal forms. "Tell me everything," she said. So Mark did. He explained the 3 years of disrespect, the loss of his home, the threats from Jason, the parties, the damage, the eviction bags. Alice listened without interrupting, her pen flying across the notepad. When he finished, she exhaled deeply. "Mr. Benson, it's time to take your house back." She explained the legal steps slowly so Mark wouldn't miss a detail. "Your daughter and her husband are legally considered tenants now," she said. "You must file a formal eviction through the court." Mark leaned forward. "And if they refuse to leave?" Alice tapped the desk. "Then their actions become criminal: trespass, breaking and entering, and possibly assault." Her words were steady, her tone firm. "You deserve safety, Mr. Benson. And the law is on your side." She slid a stack of forms toward him. "Fill these out and take them to the Justice Court. The sheriff will deliver notice." Mark nodded, feeling the first spark of strength return to his chest. The fog of the last 3 years began to lift. When he left the attorney's office, he felt different, lighter, stronger. The same way he used to feel walking out of a burning building carrying a life he'd saved. He filed the eviction papers that afternoon, paid the fees, and stopped at a hardware store on his way home. He bought a small fireproof safe and placed it on the passenger seat beside him like precious cargo. Inside it, later that evening, he would hide the deed to his home, his birth certificate, his late wife's death certificate, and every legal document Alice had given him. He locked the safe and listened to the click. That sound, small as it was, felt like the beginning of taking back his life. For 10 days, Mark lived quietly and moved carefully. He left before Mia and Jason woke and returned after they had gone to bed, avoiding confrontation while the eviction clock ticked. They believed he was giving up. They believed the old man had finally accepted defeat. But Mark documented everything: trash left piled up, new holes in the wall, loud parties until 3 a.m. He wrote it all down in a journal, photographed every bit of damage, saved text messages and voicemails. His firefighter instincts resurfaced: assess, plan, act. And late one afternoon, he heard the knock on the front door, the heavy official knock he had been waiting for. The sheriff had arrived. Deputy Collins stood at the doorway holding a stack of papers. "Eviction notice for Jason Miller and Mia Miller," he announced. Jason's footsteps thundered across the living room before Mark even moved. "What the hell is this?" Jason barked, snatching the papers from the deputy. Mia hovered behind him, eyes wide. "Dad, you filed this?" Mark remained in the doorway of his small room, his voice calm. "You have 30 days. Jason crumpled the papers in his fist and stepped closer. "You won't follow through. You don't have the guts." Mark didn't answer. His silence said everything. The days that followed felt like a storm waiting to break. Jason slammed doors, cursed loudly, and made threatening phone calls that he didn't realize Mark could hear through the walls. Mia left notes around the house: "You'll regret this. Family doesn't do this. You're throwing your own daughter away." Mark kept documenting. Every slammed door, every insult, every new scratch on the wall. He knew what was coming: resistance, anger, desperation. But he also knew they believed he was bluffing. That belief was Mark's greatest weapon. As the court date approached, Mark dressed in the same clean shirt and khaki pants he wore to the lawyer's office. He drove downtown again with steady hands and a calm heartbeat. In the courtroom, he sat alone, while Jason and Mia never showed. "They chose not to appear?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's pen scratched across paper. "Writ of possession granted." 10 minutes later, Mark walked out holding the paper that would change everything. He paused on the courthouse steps, letting the warm sunlight wash over him. "It's almost over," he whispered. Friday morning became the key moment, the day everything shifted. Mark hired a locksmith named Eric, a quiet man with weathered hands who understood the seriousness immediately. "They gone?" Eric asked. "For now," Mark replied. Within an hour, the doors were changed. New locks slid smoothly into place, high-security deadbolts gleaming like armor. When Eric handed Mark the new keys, he said, "You're protected now." Mark nodded, gripping them tightly. For the first time in 3 years, he held the keys to his own home, not shared, not borrowed, not tolerated, his. At 10:40 a.m., Jason's truck rolled into the driveway. Mia tried her key first. It jammed. She pulled it out and tried again, frustration rising. "Dad, open the door." Jason stepped forward, shoving her aside. His key also failed. He glared through the window at Mark, who stood calmly inside. "Open this door." Jason shouted. Mark didn't move. Didn't speak. Jason's face twisted in fury. "Fine. We'll see about that." Mia grabbed his arm. "Jason, stop." But Jason was already marching toward his truck with a dangerous, determined stride. He returned with a heavy metal crowbar, raising it like a weapon. Neighbors stepped outside, sensing trouble. Mia shouted, "Do it. Break it." Jason slammed the crowbar into the door. The sound echoed down the street like thunder. Wood splintered. Another strike. The frame shook. Mark stood inside, keeping his breathing steady, phone in hand. He pressed 911. "My son-in-law is breaking into my home with a crowbar," he said calmly. "I have a court order of eviction." The dispatcher's voice sharpened. "Units on the way. Stay inside." Jason swung again, sweat flying from his forehead. The door cracked, hanging unevenly. "One more." Mia screamed from behind him. Jason lifted the crowbar high, ready to finish the job. That was when Mark heard it. Quiet car doors closing, footsteps at the back of the house. The police moved silently, entering through the unlocked back door Mark had prepared. Officers Lopez and Grant stepped beside him, hands near their weapons. "We're here, Mr. Benson." "Stay back," Officer Lopez whispered. Jason hit the door again. The wood snapped. The door swung inward. Jason stepped inside triumphantly. "Told you nobody can keep me out," he roared. Then he froze. Two officers stood waiting. Their hands hovered near their holsters. "Sir," Officer Lopez commanded, "drop the crowbar now." Jason's eyes widened as his brain scrambled to understand the trap he had walked into. "This is my house," he shouted. "We live here." "No, sir," Officer Grant replied. "This home legally belongs to Mr. Benson. You are committing a felony." Jason's grip trembled. The crowbar clanged to the floor. The room fell silent. Officer Lopez cuffed him swiftly, reading his rights in a firm, steady voice. Mia rushed forward screaming, "Stop! Stop! He didn't do anything. Dad, tell them this is a mistake." Mark didn't move. He simply held up the writ of possession. Lopez took it, scanned it, nodded. "Everything is clear, Mr. Benson." Mia's tears turned from anger to panic. "Dad," she sobbed, "please don't do this, please." Mark looked at her with sadness, not hate. "You made your choices, Mia." His voice was quiet but unshakable. "Now you face the results." Jason was led outside in handcuffs, neighbors watching from porches and driveways. The moment the patrol car door closed, the street seemed to breathe out. Officer Grant turned to Mia. "Ma'am, you have 2 hours to collect your personal items. After that, you must leave." Mia stared at her father through the doorway, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. Mark didn't answer immediately. He looked around his living room, the place he had rebuilt inch by inch, and finally said, "Anywhere you want. But not here." Mia packed in silence, grabbing clothes, notebooks, shoes, and small items she claimed were hers. Officer Grant watched closely, ensuring she didn't touch anything that belonged to Mark. Every few minutes, Mia glanced toward her father, hoping to find a crack in his resolve. But Mark remained steady, standing near the hallway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Dad, we're family," she tried softly. Mark met her eyes. "Family doesn't destroy each other's homes," he replied. His voice was calm, not angry, just final. Mia swallowed hard and kept packing. The weight of her choices finally settled on her shoulders. When her 2 hours ended, Officer Grant stepped forward. "Ma'am, time's up." Mia paused at the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad, is this really goodbye?" Mark looked at her, the daughter he once carried on his shoulders, the girl who used to fall asleep on his chest after long days. Somewhere along the years, they had lost each other. "Goodbye for now," he said quietly. "Maybe one day, when you're different." She nodded weakly, wiped her face with her sleeve, and followed the officer outside. For the first time in years, Mark closed the door behind her without hesitation. The next morning, sunlight poured through the clean windows, lighting up the living room that now felt larger without chaos and clutter. Mark made himself a proper breakfast: eggs, toast, and black coffee, something he hadn't done since Mia and Jason took over the kitchen. The silence felt heavy but peaceful, like a calm after a long storm. He walked through the house slowly, touching furniture that had been shoved away, straightening frames that had been neglected, and reclaiming space he had lost. Each small action stitched his home back together, piece by piece. Later that week, Mark received a call from Alice, the attorney. Jason accepted the plea agreement, she said. 3 years probation, anger management, and a strict protective order. Mark nodded, listening. He'll stay away, Alice continued, or he'll go straight to jail. Mark thanked her and hung up. He looked around his restored living room, the sunlight warming the hardwood floors. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. For the first time in years, it felt like a home built with love and memory, not chaos and disrespect. By Friday afternoon, Mark drove to a neighborhood barbecue hosted by his old friend, Tom Bradford, from Station 24. The smell of burgers filled the air, and the sound of friendly laughter reminded Mark of a world he hadn't visited in too long. "Mark. Over here." Tom waved him over. "Heard everything you've been dealing with. Proud of you, man." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Didn't feel proud. Just felt necessary. Tom handed him a plate piled with food. "Sometimes protecting yourself means letting people face their consequences," Tom said. "You did exactly what needed to be done." Mark nodded, taking in the warmth of the moment. He felt lighter, freer, ready to step back into life without fear. When Mark returned home from the barbecue that evening, he paused in the driveway and looked at the house. For years he had dreaded coming home, knowing noise, disrespect, or conflict always waited behind the door. But now it felt different, steady, warm, safe. He stepped inside and inhaled deeply. No cigarette smell. No loud music. No strangers sleeping on his furniture. Just quiet. He walked through the living room, turned off a hallway light, and smiled to himself. Peace, he realized, wasn't loud. It was soft, steady, and earned. Over the next few days, Mark worked room by room, restoring what had been damaged or tossed aside. He replaced the curtains Mia had ruined, installed new shelves for his books, and restored the picture of his late wife Linda to its place beside the lamp. "There you are," he murmured, touching the frame. The photo sat exactly where it belonged, back on the nightstand, not buried beneath clutter and carelessness. Every repair Mark made felt like another piece of himself returning. Not just the firefighter he once was, but the man who built this home with love. One afternoon, Mark stood in the doorway of the small storage room they had forced him into for 3 long years. The cot was still there, but the room felt hollow now, lifeless and cold. He stepped inside slowly, running his hand along the wall. This place had been his cage, the reminder of how much he had lost. "Never again," he whispered. He removed the cot, swept the floor, and shut off the lights. The door clicked softly as he closed it, this time for the very last time. The chapter of being pushed aside was over. A week later, Mark received an envelope in the mail with no return address. When he opened it, he found a short letter in Mia's handwriting. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness right now. I just hope one day you'll let me explain." Mark sat at his kitchen table, reading it twice. The apology felt real, but the wound was still fresh. He set the letter down carefully. "Maybe one day," he whispered. He wasn't ready to open the door again, not after everything that had happened, but he wasn't ready to shut it forever. Healing took time. That night, Mark stepped onto his front porch, letting the warm Texas breeze touch his face. The street was quiet, porch lights glowing softly up and down the block. For the first time in years, he didn't fear who might come home drunk, shout in the hallway, or throw another party. He leaned against the railing and sipped a cup of coffee. His home, his sanctuary, was his again. He looked out at the neighborhood and whispered, "Linda. I did it. I got our home back." And for the first time in a long time, he felt proud. The following morning, Mark spent time trimming the hedges along his yard. It felt good to work the shears, to shape the bushes the way he liked them. A neighbor walking her dog paused at the sidewalk. "Morning, Mr. Benson," she said warmly. "We're glad things are peaceful again." Mark smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So am I," he replied. She nodded with quiet understanding before continuing her walk. Mark looked around his tidy yard, feeling a new sense of belonging. The chaos was gone, replaced by simple stability, something he had missed more than he realized. Inside, he rearranged furniture, pushing his favorite reading chair to the sunny corner near the window. He placed a small blanket over the armrest, the one Linda had knitted years ago. "You always said this spot was perfect for reading," he murmured. He sat down, opened an old novel, and let the quiet settle over him. For the first time in 3 years, he actually read more than a page without interruption. As sunlight warmed his shoulder, he felt the weight of years lift. This wasn't just comfort. It was restoration. Later that evening, the protective order papers arrived by mail, clearly stamped with the court seal. Officer Lopez had already explained the limits, but seeing it written made everything feel permanent. Jason was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of Mark's home, no exceptions. Mark held the paper in his hands, feeling the certainty it offered. For years, he'd lived with unpredictability, fear, and tension. Now the law itself stood between him and any danger. He placed the papers inside his safe, locking them with a soft click that echoed with finality. That night, Mark cooked himself a proper dinner: grilled chicken, vegetables, and rice. He set the table with his best plates, the ones Mia and Jason had shoved into boxes and hidden away. As he ate, he let the silence wrap around him like a blanket. He didn't rush. He didn't worry about someone barging in or shouting through the halls. He simply enjoyed the meal. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and whispered, "This is what home is supposed to feel like." A quiet smile touched his lips. Over the next week, Mark repaired the last few pieces of damage, patching a crack in the wall, repainting the hallway, tightening a loose doorknob. Each small fix felt symbolic, like he was sewing the seams of his life back together. He paused often and looked around, seeing only his possessions, his choices, his peace. The house looked brighter, almost as if it had been holding its breath through the turmoil. Now it stood proud again. Mark felt proud too, not because of the struggle, but because he had refused to lose himself. One morning, as he watered the garden, his neighbor, Mr. Wallace, stopped near the fence. "Heard you handled things the right way," the older man said. "Most folks would have snapped." Mark nodded. "Took everything I had to stay calm." Mr. Wallace chuckled. "That's strength. Not fists. Not shouting. Patience." Mark smiled at that. He had spent 32 years teaching firefighters how to stay steady under pressure, yet he had almost forgotten the lesson himself. Now, hearing it from someone else made it clearer. Remaining calm had given him back everything anger would have destroyed. Later that day, Mark found Mia's letter again on his table. He read it slowly, letting each word sink in. She was lost, confused, maybe ashamed, but she hadn't blamed him this time. That alone was progress. He folded the letter and placed it gently inside a drawer. "Healing isn't a straight line," he whispered. He didn't know whether she would ever earn his trust again, but he hoped for her sake, she would find a better path. He wasn't closing the door on her entirely, only keeping it locked until she changed her life. That evening, Mark sat on his porch with a cold glass of water, letting the cool breeze touch his face. The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. He watched children ride bicycles, listened to distant laughter, felt the rhythm of life returning to normal around him. For too long, he had been trapped in conflict, drowning in tension he never deserved. Now he sat quietly, heart steady, breathing in the peace that came after surviving a storm. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. As night fell, Mark walked back inside and stopped by the framed photo of Linda. He touched the glass lightly, smiling. "I did what you would have wanted," he said softly. "I stood up for myself." The room around him was clean, calm, and safe. He imagined her voice telling him she was proud. He straightened the frame, turned off the living room lights, and walked down the hallway, his hallway, without fear or hesitation. Every step echoed with purpose, confidence, and freedom. Mark ended the night sitting in his restored reading chair, the soft hum of the house around him. No shouting. No fear. No disrespect. Just the steady rhythm of a home finally returned. He opened his book again, but paused, listening to the silence. A peaceful silence, earned, protected, and safe. "I'm home," he whispered, letting the words settle deep in his heart. And for the first time in years, the house answered him not with chaos, but with warmth. Mark smiled, turned the page, and began the next chapter of his life, one he would live on his own terms, with dignity, courage, and peace. The end.